The knock came at 7:32 in the morning. I know the exact time because my life runs on a schedule not of my own making, but one I have surrendered to with the quiet dignity of a defeated nation. 7:30 is for the second cup of coffee. 7:35 is for staring into the middle distance and contemplating the vast, beige expanse of my future. The knock, therefore, was an anomaly, a disruption in the data stream. My first thought was that it was a package delivery. An overzealous driver, starting his route before the sun had properly cleared the horizon. My second thought was that Mrs. Gable from next door had locked herself out again, a frequent occurrence that usually involved her yapping terrier, Winston, somehow securing the deadbolt from the inside. Neither theory prepared me for the reality waiting on my porch. I pulled the door open, a carefully constructed phrase about early mornings dissolving on my tongue. Standing there, backlit by the pale watercolor wash of the rising sun, was a ghost. A ghost wearing a worn leather jacket, faded jeans, and a smirk that I hadn't seen in person in 12 years, but had replayed in my memory 1,000 times. Mia. Her hair was shorter, a dark, chaotic halo around her face instead of the long braid she used to whip me with in 3rd grade. There were fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but the eyes themselves were the same, a sharp, intelligent green that always seemed to be dissecting the world, and me along with it. In one hand, she held a bottle of champagne, the cheap kind we used to dream of buying from the corner store. In the other, a crushed box of Twinkies. She raised them both, a mock offering. "Happy 30th, Leo," she said, her voice a little raspier than I remembered, but just as potent. Pact's a pact. My brain, usually a well-organized depot of logistical solutions and predictable outcomes, short-circuited. It was a complete system failure. All I could manage was a single, stupid word. Mia. Her smirk widened. In the flesh. Are you going to let me in, or are we consummating this 20-year engagement on the welcome mat? Because I think Mrs. Gable is watching from her window, and I'd rather not give her that kind of show before she's had her bran flakes. I blinked, stepping back on autopilot, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. She swept past me, bringing with her the scent of road dust, coffee, and something uniquely her, a crisp, wild smell like the air after a thunderstorm. She dropped the champagne and Twinkies on my meticulously clean kitchen counter, the clatter echoing in the cathedral-like silence of my house. My house. My quiet, orderly, predictable house. The pact. It had been a joke, a ridiculous promise made by 2 10-year-olds sitting in a treehouse we'd built from stolen scraps of plywood. We'd sworn, with the solemnity only children can muster, that if we were both still single on our 30th birthdays, we'd marry each other. We'd sealed it with a shared, lukewarm soda and a blood oath that involved more spit than blood. It was the kind of memory that was supposed to stay buried, a fond, dusty artifact of a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else. It was not supposed to show up on my doorstep holding a $10 bottle of bubbly. She spun around, taking in my living room. Her eyes scanned the gray sofa, the minimalist coffee table with its single, strategically placed book, the muted, abstract print on the wall. It was a room designed by algorithm, curated for maximum inoffensiveness. A room that screamed adult, a room that screamed boring. It was Claire's lingering ghost I was living with. Not the woman herself, but the design principles she'd instilled in me. Clean lines, Leo. A neutral palette suggests stability. Claire had been all about suggesting stability, right up until the moment she decided my particular brand of it was a cage. Wow, Mia said, her voice carefully neutral, but I could hear the laughter dancing just beneath the surface. It's very tidy. I'm an operations supervisor, I said, the words coming out stiff, defensive. Tidiness is part of the job description, right? Of course, she ran a finger over the back of my sofa, leaving a smudge in the perfect, vacuumed lines. I felt an irrational twitch in my left eye. So, are we doing this? A quick Vegas elopement? Or do you want a big church wedding? I'm not sure this place could handle the chaos of a reception, though. We might scuff the floors. Her wit was a physical force, a series of quick jabs I was no longer conditioned to parry. For the last 4 years, my primary conversational partner had been Claire, whose idea of banter was debating the merits of different shades of grayish paint. It was a stupid kid's promise, Mia. The best kind, she shot back without missing a beat. She popped the cork on the champagne. It flew across the room and hit the wall with a dull thud, leaving a small, circular dent in the drywall. I flinched. She didn't even seem to notice. She poured the fizzing liquid into 2 of my coffee mugs, because of course I didn't own champagne flutes. She handed me a mug. To being 30, single, and contractually obligated. You still the hair. The sunlight caught in her hair, illuminating the stray strands that refused to be tamed. Her hands, I noticed, were not delicate. There were calluses on her palms and a faint scar across her knuckles. They were hands that did things, that held cameras and climbed things and wrestled with the world. They were not the hands of someone who worried about scuffing the floors. I took the mug. The cheap, sweet fizz of a champagne was an assault on my morning palate, which was accustomed to the bitter precision of black coffee. It tasted like rebellion. It tasted like 10 years old. You're serious, I said, the realization dawning with the slow, terrifying certainty of sunrise. You actually came here because of the Pact. Partly, she admitted, her gaze softening for the first time. She looked around my sterile room again, and this time, there was no mockery in her eyes, only a sort of gentle curiosity. And partly because I was passing through, and, well, it's been 12 years. I wanted to see who you grew up to be. The question hung in the air between us. So who are you? I took a long drink of the champagne. I was Leo Maxwell, 30 years old, operations supervisor at a regional logistics hub. I had a mortgage, a sensible sedan, and a 401k. My blood pressure was excellent. My life was a monument to predictability. A year ago, the woman I thought I was going to marry had packed her things and told me, with the gentle cruelty of someone trying to be kind, that I was a wonderful foundation. I know you feel stable, Leo, Claire had said, her voice calm and measured, as if she were explaining a quarterly report. But I don't want to live in the basement anymore. I want to see the sky. She left me for a man who taught rock climbing and lived in a van. The irony was not lost on me. I had spent the last year reinforcing that foundation, doubling down on the stability, proving her right. I had become so safe, so predictable, that the most exciting part of my week was the successful implementation of a new inventory tracking system. And now, here was Mia, who had sent me postcards from every corner of the globe. Mia, who chased monsoons in Southeast Asia and photographed glaciers in Iceland. Mia, who was the human embodiment of seeing the sky. She was a hurricane walking into a house of cards. My house of cards. I grew up to be a guy with a dent in his wall, I said, gesturing with my mug. She followed my gaze to the mark from the cork. A slow smile spread across her face, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Good, she said, her voice low and warm. It's a start. This place could use a few more dents. We spent the rest of the morning on my porch, the bottle of champagne sweating between us on the small wicker table. She tore open the Twinkies, and we ate them like children, the artificial cream filling coating our tongues. It felt utterly surreal. She talked, and I listened, a role I was comfortable with. She told me about her life as a freelance photographer, a whirlwind of assignments and deadlines, and sleeping in airports. She spoke of light and shadow, of capturing a single, perfect moment in a world of endless noise. She never bragged. She just stated the facts of her life with a sense of wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe her own luck. What about you? She asked, finally turning her full attention on me. What's the life of an operations supervisor really like? Is it as thrilling as it sounds? The old Leo, the Claire-conditioned Leo, would have given her the sanitized version. The talk of efficiency, of managing supply chains, of the quiet satisfaction of a system working perfectly. It was a speech I'd given 100 times at dinner parties, one that usually resulted in people's eyes glazing over. But looking at Mia, at the genuine curiosity in her gaze, the corporate jargon felt like a lie. It's like conducting an orchestra, I heard myself say, the words surprising me as much as her. 100 different moving parts, trucks, people, scanners, schedules. If one piece is out of sync, the whole thing falls apart. My job is to stand in the middle of the chaos and find the rhythm, to make sure the symphony plays. I stopped, embarrassed. It sounded pretentious. Claire would have laughed. Mia didn't laugh. She leaned forward, her chin resting in her hand. A symphony of boxes, she murmured, a smile playing on her lips. I like that. You always were the one who could make sense of the mess. Remember that disastrous science fair project? The volcano that was supposed to erupt with baking soda and vinegar, and instead erupted with a fire extinguisher because you used my dad's special vinegar from the garage, which turned out to be turpentine. I finished, a real laugh escaping me. It felt like a rusty mechanism creaking back to life. You were the one who cleaned it all up, she said softly. You told Mr. Henderson it was a demonstration of a pyrocumulus cloud. You got us a B-. I'm a problem solver. I shrugged, trying to downplay it. No, she said, her green eyes pinning me in place. You're a protector. You protect the project. You protect the system. You make things safe. The word hung in the air. Safe. The very thing Claire had used as a weapon against me. Coming from Mia, it sounded different. It didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like an observation, like a fact. The easy rhythm of the morning carried us into the afternoon. My meticulously planned birthday, a solo trip to the hardware store followed by an evening of assembling a new shelving unit, was unceremoniously scrapped. Mia declared that no one should be alone on their 30th, especially not her fiancé. The joke was starting to feel less like a joke. We're going out, she announced, draining the last of her coffee mug champagne. To the Lamplighter. We're finally old enough to get in without a fake ID. The Lamplighter was our town's dive bar, a place of local legend that we had, as teenagers, regarded with a mixture of terror and fascination. The idea of going there now felt strange, like trying on clothes that hadn't fit in over a decade. I don't know, Mia. Leo, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. We're going to drink a beer in the place we once swore we'd conquer. It's a symbolic victory for the Pact. And so, a few hours later, I found myself sitting in a sticky vinyl booth at the Lamplighter. The place smelled of stale beer and regret, exactly as I'd imagined. The lights were dim, the music was loud, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely out of my element. It was exhilarating. Mia, of course, looked perfectly at home. She was arguing with the bartender about the merits of a particular local IPA, her laughter cutting through the din. She had a way of commanding a space, of drawing people into her orbit without even trying. I watched her, feeling like an astronomer observing a newly discovered star. She came back to the booth with 2 pints, her face flushed with victory. He's a stout man, but I wore him down. He even admitted this ale has superior hop character. You're a menace, I said, but I was smiling. And you love it. She slid into the booth opposite me, our knees bumping under the table. A jolt, small but electric, shot up my leg. I shifted, tried to regain my composure. It was in that moment of distraction that I heard a voice I hadn't expected to hear again outside of a courtroom or a nightmare. Lau, my God, is that you? I looked up, standing by our table. A look of manufactured surprise on her face was Claire. Beside her stood a man with a man bun and a look of serene superiority. The rock climber. Her new, more exciting life. My stomach plummeted. Of all the bars in all the towns in all the world, she had to walk into this one. Claire, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. What a surprise, isn't it? Her eyes, which I once thought were warm and kind, now looked like polished stones. They flickered over to Mia, a quick, dismissive assessment. I didn't know you came to places like this. And you've made a friend. The word friend was delivered with a subtle, condescending emphasis, as if I were a lonely child who'd finally been invited to a play date. It was a social test, a power move designed to put me in my place, to remind me of my status as the quiet, boring ex. I saw Mia tense beside me, her back straightening. She was about to say something witty and cutting that would put Claire in her place. I could feel it coiling in the air between them. But in that split second, something inside me shifted. The protector, as Mia had called me. The part of me that managed chaos. It wasn't about protecting a system this time. It was about protecting this moment. Protecting her. Before Mia could speak, I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were warm, strong, and they curled around mine instantly. I looked directly at Claire, my gaze steady. She's not a friend, Claire. I felt Mia's fingers tighten around mine. I took a breath. She's the woman I'm contractually obligated to marry. We're here celebrating our engagement. The silence that followed was a thing of beauty. Claire's perfectly painted smile faltered. The rock climber's serene expression twitched. They stared at our joined hands, then back at my face, searching for the lie. They wouldn't find it, because in that moment, it didn't feel like a lie. It felt like the truest thing I'd said in years. Mia, to her credit, didn't miss a beat. She squeezed my hand and gave Claire a dazzling smile. He's a traditionalist, she said, her voice dripping with mock adoration. Insisted on honoring a childhood contract. It's terribly romantic, isn't it? Claire stammered something about being happy for us. A phrase so transparently false, it was almost comical. She and the man bun made a hasty retreat to the other side of the bar, their backs rigid with indignation. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked at Mia. Her eyes were shining in the dim light of the bar, not with laughter, but with something else. Something I couldn't quite name. A contractual obligation, huh? She said softly, her thumb tracing patterns on the back of my hand. Pact's a pact. I managed, my voice a little shaky. She held my gaze for a long moment, the noise of the bar fading into a distant hum. The air between us felt charged, thick with unspoken things. It was no longer a joke. It hadn't been for hours. We left the bar not long after that, the small victory leaving a strange, electric taste in my mouth. The night air was cool, and we walked in a comfortable silence, our shoulders occasionally brushing. The bravado from the bar had faded, leaving behind a raw, uncertain space between us. I had acted on an impulse I didn't recognize, a sudden, fierce need to draw a line in the sand. And now, in the quiet aftermath, I had to deal with the consequences. We reached my front porch, the same spot where the day had begun with cheap champagne and a ridiculous proposition. It felt like a lifetime ago. Well, I said, jamming my hands into my pockets. That was a birthday. Mia didn't answer right away. She leaned against the porch railing, looking up at the sky, a smattering of faint stars visible even through the town's light pollution. I watched her profile, the clean line of her jaw, the way a stray piece of hair caught the light from my porch lamp. You know, she said, her voice quiet, thoughtful. Claire used to talk about you. We kept in touch for a while after I first left town. Before she changed, my stomach tightened. I didn't want to hear this. I didn't want to know what version of me Claire had been selling to the world. She always described you as being like a comfortable chair, Mia continued, her eyes still on the stars. Dependable, sturdy, always there. I flinched. It was a kinder version of the foundation speech, but it was the same sentiment. I was a piece of furniture, useful but inanimate, an object. I don't think she ever realized, Mia said, turning to look at me, and her gaze was so direct, so piercing, it felt like it could see right through my carefully constructed walls. She saw the chair and completely missed the fact that you were the whole damn house, the one holding the roof up, keeping the storm out. The air left my lungs in a rush. The whole damn house. It was the perfect antidote, the direct inverse of Claire's parting shot. Claire saw me as the starting point, the thing you build upon. Mia saw me as the entire structure, the thing that provides shelter, the thing that endures. One saw a limitation, the other saw a strength. This was the moment of being seen. It wasn't just that she was defending me. It was that she understood me. She had looked at the very quality my last partner had discarded me for, and she had reframed it, not as a flaw, but as a virtue. My quiet, steady nature wasn't boring. It was protective. My need for order wasn't restrictive. It was what kept the chaos at bay. A wave of something hot and unfamiliar washed over me. It was gratitude, but it was more than that. It was a profound sense of relief of being known. For a year, I had been walking around with Claire's definition of me branded on my soul. With a single sentence, Mia had offered me a new one, a better one. I started, but the words wouldn't come. What could I possibly say to that? Thank you felt laughably inadequate. She gave me a small, knowing smile. You don't have to say anything, Leo. She pushed off the railing and stepped closer. The space between us shrank until I could feel the warmth radiating from her. I've always known who you are, even after 12 years. She reached up and touched the dent on the wall by the door, the one her champagne cork had made that morning. She ran her finger over it gently, a thoughtful expression on her face. A house needs a few dents, she murmured, more to herself than to me. It's how you know it's been lived in. And then she was gone, a soft goodnight, fiancé, tossed over her shoulder as she walked to the small, slightly battered car parked at my curb. I stood on my porch, one hand resting on the new dent in my wall, and watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner. I felt like my entire world had been tilted on its axis. The quiet, orderly life I had so carefully curated suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a waiting room. I had been waiting, I realized, waiting for something to happen. And then it had. It had knocked on my door at 7:32 in the morning. The next few days passed in a strange, heightened reality. Mia didn't leave. She was staying in a motel on the edge of town, but she spent most of her time with me. It was effortless. We fell back into the easy camaraderie of our childhood, but it was layered with something new, an adult awareness that hummed just beneath the surface of our witty banter. We worked on my neglected backyard. My yard, like my house, was neat and orderly but lifeless. A patch of lawn, a few sad-looking shrubs. Mia saw it as a blank canvas. She sketched out plans for a garden, for stone pathways, for a fire pit. She had a vision. You see a patch of dirt, she said, kneeling in the grass, a smudge of soil on her cheek. I see 3 seasons of color. You need more chaos in your life, Leo. I found myself not just agreeing, but actively wanting it. The man who scheduled his grocery trips, was suddenly ripping up sod and hauling bags of mulch with a kind of manic glee. We worked side by side, our hands in the same dirt. We didn't talk much, but the silence was full. It was the silence of 2 people engaged in a shared purpose. It was on the 3rd day of this domestic blitz that the sleek, black Audi pulled up to the curb. It was so out of place on my quiet, suburban street that it might as well have been a spaceship. It hummed with a low, expensive thrum, and I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck. A man got out. He was tall, dressed in clothes that were artfully casual and cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He had the kind of easy, predatory grace that set my teeth on edge. He surveyed my modest house with a look of faint amusement, his gaze finally landing on Mia, who was wrestling with a stubborn root. "Darling," he called out, his voice smooth and condescending. "I see you've taken up horticulture. How rustic." Mia froze. The color drained from her face. She stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Julian," she said, her voice flat. "What are you doing here?" This was him, the ex, the art gallery owner she'd mentioned in passing, the one who tried to curate her life. Julian. Even his name sounded arrogant. He strode onto my lawn, his expensive shoes leaving imprints in the soft earth. He ignored me completely, his focus entirely on Mia. He was like a collector who had come to reclaim a prized piece that had gone missing. "What am I doing here?" He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "I'm saving you from yourself, it seems. This little detour into pastoral nostalgia is charming, but your exhibit in Milan isn't going to set itself up. Stop playing house with the local help and come home." The local help, the words were a deliberate, calculated insult, designed to dismiss me, to render me invisible. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. A hot, angry tide rose in my chest. I took a step forward, ready to tell him exactly where he could park his Audi, but Mia put a hand on my arm, a silent command to wait. She faced Julian, her expression unreadable. She was completely calm, her stillness a stark contrast to his agitated energy. "First," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. He is not the local help, he's Leo. And this is his house, which you are currently trespassing on. Julian waved a dismissive hand. Semantics. Mia, we don't have time for this. I have a flight to catch. No, she said, the words sharp and final. You have a flight to catch. I have a garden to plant. She took a step back, aligning herself with me. A small but significant shift. My home, Julian, is my decision. And my work doesn't need your management anymore. You seem to be confusing partner with proprietor. I think you should leave. It was a masterclass in dismissal. Clean, direct, and utterly devastating. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. She had simply drawn a boundary, and his power dissolved against it. Julian stared at her, his handsome face contorting with a mixture of disbelief and fury. He looked from her to me, really seeing me for the first time. He sized me up, my work clothes, the dirt under my fingernails, my average, unremarkable house. He saw what Claire had seen, the foundation, the comfortable chair, and he couldn't comprehend it. He couldn't understand why she would choose this over him, over Milan, over the world he offered. You're making a mistake, he spat, the smoothness gone from his voice. No, Mia said, her voice softening slightly, but no less firm. I'm correcting one. He stood there for another moment, seemingly lost, before turning on his heel and stalking back to his car. The Audi roared to life and sped away, leaving behind the smell of burning rubber and wounded pride. The silence he left in his wake was heavier than any sound. The confrontation had been short, but it had changed the atmosphere completely. The easy, comfortable bubble we had been living in for the past few days had been pierced. The reality of Mia's other life, a world of international art exhibits and sleek, condescending men, had come crashing into my quiet backyard. I looked at the freshly turned earth, at the half-planted shrubs. It suddenly felt foolish, like a child's game. She belonged in Milan. What was she doing here, playing in the dirt with me? So that was Julian, I said, my voice sounding hollow. That was him, she confirmed, her gaze fixed on the spot where his car had been. She looked shaken, but also strangely liberated. The insecurity that had been dormant inside me began to stir. It was a familiar, bitter taste. I was the safe choice, the port in a storm. But storms pass. And then what? People leave ports. They seek open water. Clara taught me that. The stakes were suddenly, terrifyingly clear. She didn't need me. She had a whole, vibrant, exciting life that had nothing to do with me. Any connection between us wasn't born of necessity. It would have to be a choice. And looking at myself, covered in dirt, standing in front of my beige house, I felt like a very illogical choice indeed. The rest of the afternoon was quiet. The easy flow of conversation was gone, replaced by a careful awareness of the space between us. We finished planting the last of the shrubs, the shared task a temporary shield against the difficult emotions swirling in the air. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across our handiwork, the silence became unbearable. We ended up on the porch again. It was becoming our place, the stage for all our most pivotal scenes. We sat in the two wicker chairs, a new, unspoken tension separating us like a pane of thick glass. I could feel her watching me, could feel her waiting, but I didn't know what to say. The arrival of Julian had excavated all my old insecurities, laying them bare. Finally, she spoke, her voice cutting through the twilight hush. You're doing that thing again. I looked over at her. Her face was mostly in shadow, but I could see the intensity in her eyes. What thing? The thing where you build a fortress inside your head and pull up the drawbridge, she said. You're calculating risks, running scenarios. You're trying to manage the outcome. It was so accurate it felt like an accusation. It was exactly what I was doing. I was weighing the potential pain of her leaving against the fleeting joy of her being here. The math wasn't in my favor. What are you afraid of, Leo? She asked, her voice softer now. Not challenging, but genuinely curious. I looked away, out at the new garden we had built. It was a mess of turned earth and fragile, hopeful plants. It was chaos. It was her. What was I afraid of? I was afraid of being a foundation again. I was afraid of being a temporary shelter. I was afraid that she would wake up one morning and realize she wanted to see the sky, and my sturdy roof was just in the way. I was afraid of being left behind in the quiet, orderly silence. Her directness demanded an honest answer. The usual evasions, the self-deprecating jokes, they wouldn't work with her. She saw right through them. She saw me. "I'm not afraid of you, Mia," I said, the words coming out raw and untidied. "I'm afraid of what it's like when you're not here." I finally turned to look at her, forcing myself to meet her gaze. For the last year, my life has been quiet, controlled. I told myself it was peaceful, but it wasn't. It was just quiet. I took a breath, the confession tumbling out of me now, unstoppable. "You showed up, and you brought all this noise, this chaos, and you filled up all the empty spaces I didn't even know I had. When you're here, the quiet is gone. But when I think about you leaving," I trailed off, the thought too difficult to articulate. "The silence is going to be a lot louder than it was before." There it was, the truth. Not that I liked her or was attracted to her, but that her presence had fundamentally changed the texture of my existence. She wasn't just a person, she was a weather system, and I had been living in a drought for a very long time. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just watched me, her expression unreadable. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I just handed her the schematics to my fortress and pointed out all the weak spots. Then she stood up. She crossed the small space between our chairs and stopped in front of me. She reached down and took my hand, pulling me to my feet. "You think I'm just a storm passing through," she said, her voice a low murmur. It wasn't a question. I couldn't answer. I just looked at her, at the earnest, searching look in her incredible green eyes. "Julian wanted to put me in a gilded frame, on a white wall in a silent gallery," she said. "He wanted to own the storm, to control it. You." She lifted her free hand and gently touched my cheek. Her fingers were cool from the evening air, but her touch sent a jolt of heat through me. "You just stand in the middle of it and try to find the rhythm." She was using my own words, my silly, pretentious metaphor about my job. But she wasn't mocking it. She was honoring it. "You don't try to contain the chaos, Leo," she whispered, stepping closer still. "You give a safe place to land." And then she closed the remaining distance between us. The kiss wasn't explosive or desperate. It was a quiet confirmation. It was the slow, deep relief of a key finally sliding into a lock it was designed for. Her lips were soft, and she tasted of earth and evening air and something that was just Mia. My hands, acting on their own accord, came up to cup her face, my thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. It was a moment of perfect, profound stillness in the center of the storm. All the noise in my head, the insecurities, the calculations, the fear, it all went silent. There was only this. Her. Us. The ringing of a phone shattered the moment. We pulled apart, both of us breathless and disoriented. The sound was coming from inside the house. My phone. My stupid, schedule-enforcing, perfectly timed phone. I said, my voice hoarse. "Yeah," she breathed, her eyes wide and dark in the twilight. The spell was broken, but the magic still lingered in the air, a shimmering, palpable thing. Whatever happened next, a line had been crossed. The drawbridge was down. The fortress had been breached. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid. I was hopeful. The phone call was my sister, Chloe, a routine check-in that I dispatched with a level of distracted haste that earned me a concerned, "Is everything okay? You sound weird." Everything was weird. Everything was different. When I returned to the porch, Mia was leaning against the railing, her arms crossed, a small, wry smile on her face. The charged intensity of the moment before the kiss had been replaced by a lighter, almost giddy energy. "Saved by the bell," she quipped. Or cruelly interrupted. I countered, moving to stand beside her. We stood in a comfortable silence, watching the first fireflies of the evening begin to blink in the new garden. The kiss had changed everything. It had taken our history, our banter, our unspoken connection, and forged it into something solid and real. It was no longer a question of if, but what now. I want to take you somewhere, I said, the idea forming as I spoke it. Oh, she said, turning to me, an intrigued glint in her eye. Is this the part where you try to woo your contractually obligated bride with a fancy dinner? Nothing fancy, I said. I want to show you my symphony. The next night, I drove her not to a restaurant, but to the logistics depot where I worked. It was after hours, the sprawling complex mostly deserted except for the hum of the massive refrigeration units and the sweep of the security lights. "This is your hot date?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, cavernous parking lot. "Bringing a girl to your work? Bold move, Maxwell. Trust me," I said, leading her toward a side entrance. I took her to the main sorting hub. It was a cavern of concrete and steel, a place of immense, organized complexity. During the day, it was a cacophony of beeping scanners, shouting voices, and roaring forklifts. But at night, it was silent. It was a sleeping giant. I led her up a series of metal catwalks to the central observation office, a glass box suspended high above the floor. From here, you could see the entire operation laid out below. A labyrinth of conveyor belts, numbered bays, and perfectly aligned pallets. "This is it," I said, gesturing to the scene below. "This is my world." She didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood at the window, her hands pressed against the glass, taking it all in. I watched her, my stomach in knots. This was a risk. I was showing her the most mundane, most practical, most Leo part of my life. I was showing her the foundation, raw and exposed. "It's beautiful," she finally whispered, her breath fogging the glass. I blinked. "It's a warehouse, Mia." "No," she said, turning to me, her eyes shining with a genuine, unforced enthusiasm. "It's a city grid at night. It's a circuit board. It's order. You see all these lines, all these patterns? You see the potential energy here? It's incredible. The light, the shadows, the sheer scale of it." She was seeing it through her photographer's eye. She was finding the art in my logistics. She wasn't just tolerating my world. She was appreciating it, finding a beauty in it that I had started to take for granted. She pulled a small camera from her jacket pocket, a simple point-and-shoot, and started taking pictures, moving around the small office to capture different angles. She saw things I had never noticed. The way a security light created a perfect geometric shadow, the stark beauty of the red emergency stop buttons against the gray machinery. She was showing me my own world through a new lens. And in doing so, she was showing me myself. Later, sitting in my car in the empty parking lot, we talked. Really talked. She told me about Julian, about how his support for her art had slowly morphed into control. He'd started telling her what subjects were commercially viable, which galleries were acceptable, even how she should dress for openings. He wanted to be the artist's patron, she said, staring out at the dark warehouse. But he didn't want the artist. He wanted the art. He didn't understand that the messy, unpredictable, inconvenient parts are where the pictures come from. I told her more about Claire, about the slow, quiet way she had withdrawn, how she'd started talking about our future in terms of what it was lacking. Adventure, spontaneity, excitement. She wanted me to be someone else. I said, the admission tasting like old ash. And the worst part is, I tried. I booked surprise trips she didn't want to go on. I tried new hobbies I was terrible at. It was exhausting, and it didn't work. I just became a less competent version of myself. "Because you weren't broken," Mia said simply. "You didn't need fixing." We found our common ground there, in the quiet darkness of the parking lot. We were two people who had been in relationships where we were fundamentally misunderstood, where our core strengths were seen as weaknesses to be corrected. Her wildness, my stability. We had both been asked to become smaller, more manageable versions of ourselves. The days that followed were easy. The big, scary confessions were done. The external threat was gone. We were left with just us, and it was better than I could have imagined. Her life began to bleed into mine in small, meaningful ways. Her well-worn hiking boots appeared by my front door, right next to my sensible work shoes. A bag of exotic, single-origin coffee she'd picked up on her travels replaced my generic supermarket brand. Her camera bag found a permanent home on the chair in the corner of my living room, a silent, leather and brass testament to her presence. I, in turn, found myself seeping into her world. I organized her chaotic mess of charging cables and memory cards using a system of labeled Velcro ties, a gesture she found both absurd and deeply endearing. I started waking up early, not to stare into the beige void, but to make 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. One Saturday, I found her in the garden, staring intently at a patch of weeds that had stubbornly resisted our earlier efforts. "They mock me," she said, pointing a trowel at them. "They're weeds, Mia. It's what they do. It's a battle of wills," she declared, "and I will not be defeated by foliage." We spent the entire afternoon weeding the garden, working in comfortable silence, the only sounds the scrape of our tools and the chirping of birds. It was mundane, it was domestic, and it felt more real, more right, than any grand, romantic gesture ever could. We were building something quiet and sturdy. Something with a good foundation, yes, but with big windows to let in the sky. A house with a few dents in the walls, a house that was finally being lived in. The pact, the ridiculous, childish promise that had brought her to my door, had faded into the background. It was the catalyst, the spark, but what was growing between us was something else entirely. It wasn't an obligation. It was an inevitability. 1 year later, the knock came at 7:32 in the morning. I knew the time because I was already awake, sitting on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee, watching the sun come up. The porch was different now. There were pots overflowing with colorful, chaotic flowers. A wind chime, a gift from Mia, tinkled softly in the breeze. The knock wasn't on the front door. It was the soft rap of knuckles on the wooden frame of the porch screen. I turned. Mia stood there, a sleepy smile on her face, her hair a beautiful mess. She was wearing one of my old t-shirts and a pair of shorts. "Happy 31st, Leo," she murmured, sliding the screen door open and padding over to me. She took the mug I offered her and curled up in the chair beside me, tucking her feet underneath her. It had been a year of beautiful, transformative chaos. She hadn't given up her career, and I hadn't given up mine. We had found a new rhythm. She made my house her base, the quiet, stable place she could always return to from the noise of the world. And sometimes I went with her. I brought my logistical mind to her whirlwind trips, navigating airports and train schedules with an efficiency that left her in awe. I was her anchor. She, in turn, taught me to look up, to see the beauty in the unplanned detour, to find the perfect shot in the most unexpected places. She was my sky. We had been to Milan for her exhibit. I'd stood in a room full of art critics and people like Julian, and I'd watched them praise her work. But I saw something they didn't. I saw the quiet moment in a Vietnamese market, the frustrating hike through the Scottish Highlands, the freezing hours spent waiting for the light to be just right. I saw the life behind the art, and I had never been more proud. Now we were here on our porch, in our home. The garden we had planted was a riot of life and color, a testament to our first shared project. The house felt different. It was filled with her photographs, with books stacked in corners, with a lingering scent of her coffee and my soap. It was filled with us. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her warmth seeping through my shirt. "So," she said, her voice a low, contented rumble. "What's on the agenda for the birthday boy? A thrilling trip to the hardware store? Assembling some shelves?" I laughed, a real, easy sound. I was thinking of something a little more chaotic. "Oh, I was thinking," I said, turning to look at her, my heart doing a slow, steady drum roll in my chest, "that our contractual engagement has gone on long enough. Maybe it's time to make it a little more permanent." Her eyes widened, the green of them bright and clear. A slow, breathtaking smile spread across her face. She didn't say yes right away. She just leaned in and kissed me, a soft, coffee-flavored kiss that tasted like morning and home and everything I had ever wanted without knowing it. She pulled back slightly, her forehead resting against mine. She was looking over my shoulder at the front door, at the wall just beside it. "You never fixed that dent," she whispered. I followed her gaze. The small, circular mark from the champagne cork was still there. I had painted the rest of the hall, but I had deliberately painted around it. It was a scar, a landmark, the place where the news story began. No, I said softly. I never did. Good, she murmured, her eyes finding mine again. A house needs a few dents. She was still the most perceptive person I had ever met. She still saw me, the real me, with a clarity that sometimes took my breath away. She saw the house, the foundation, the roof, and the man who held it all together. She stood up and walked over to the railing, looking out at the world waking up. She had her big camera with her, the serious one, and she lifted it, framing a shot of the morning light filtering through the leaves of the old oak tree in our yard. Then she turned, the lens finding me. A year ago, I would have stiffened. I would have felt awkward, exposed. I would have worried about how I looked. Now I just smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. I let her see me. I wanted her too. She lowered the camera, a thoughtful look on her face. Still the best obligation I ever had, she said, her voice soft, echoing my words from that first night in the bar. I got up and walked over to her, wrapping my arms around her from behind, pulling her back against my chest. I rested my chin on her shoulder, looking out at the world with her. Our world. It was never an obligation, Mia, I said, my voice quiet but sure. It was an inevitability. And in the quiet of that morning, with the scent of coffee in the air and her in my arms, I knew I was finally home. Not just in a house, but in a life. A life full of beautiful, glorious chaos. A life where I was truly and completely seen. What would you have done if your childhood pact showed up at your door? Would you have slammed it shut or invited the chaos in? We all have a what if from our past, a road not taken or a promise left unfulfilled. Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.